Welcome back to Cooley Loves Comic Books. For this episode, I want to take a look at Wonder Woman Dead Earth by Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer. This book just wrapped. It's just 4 issues. It's on the DC Black label. Book 4 just came out a couple weeks ago as I'm recording this. And this is an interesting one. I'm a big fan of Daniel Warren Johnson, and I just kind of try and pay attention to whatever his next project might be. Saw that this was coming up, so I pre-ordered all of these. As soon as issue number 1 came out, I read it, and then I closed it and I sat down and I said, I don't think I'm ready for this. This was a huge departure from what I expected. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but it was definitely not what I expected as a Wonder Woman book, and it was kind of enough of a departure from anything that I had expected as a Wonder Woman story to say, like, I kind of realized that this was something where I would be better served to read this whole thing together, all in one chunk, versus read it each issue as it came out. So that's what I decided to do. I just sat down and read all 4 issues about a week ago, and honestly, I think after going through the whole story and reading it end to end that way, it took me almost a week to kind of process it, think it through, and kind of decide what hit me and what worked, so that I could sit down and kind of make this video. And where I definitely wanted to do that is, this is definitely a book where I think if you're curious about it, you should read it. But it's interesting in a lot of ways, and so I wanted to kind of touch on that. So that maybe if this is something that you were put off by or weren't going to initially grab, maybe there's still a reason here to head down to your local comic book shop and pick it up. Just right at the outset, I'll say, if you like this channel, if you like the content that I'm putting out, please do drop a like and subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate that, and it just, more than anything, it just helps the channel grow, helps other people find this. Wonder Woman is an interesting character, and I will say that I am not a huge Wonder Woman fan. By that I mean I'm not like staying up to date on all the current comic books. I haven't read a ton of the previous runs, the landmark runs or whatnot, but I'm familiar with Wonder Woman, and I like her as a character. I think she's interesting. This is definitely a completely different kind of Wonder Woman story than I've ever read or would have expected. Right at the beginning, I'll say that what's interesting about this is, most of the time with any kind of established character, if you have an artist that wants to, or a writer that wants to take that character in a different direction, I think that the most common way that they do that is to retell the origin story. And Wonder Woman has an origin story that's definitely been reworked, retold a number of times, but that's not what happens here. And in fact, I mean, Wonder Woman's origin it's touched on, it's handled, I think, in a really kind of beautiful, cool way, from a story and an artwork standpoint. But that's not what this is. This is actually a forward. This is taking the character from Wonder Woman and putting her hundreds of years into the future, and basically dropping her in the middle of a post-apocalyptic story, actually. And that's what is just so wildly different. I mean, you can tell from the covers even that there's giant monsters, there's giant kaiju here that she's fighting, in part, which again is way different from any Wonder Woman story. Man, it was really different, but in an interesting way. It's so different that one of the first questions I had, after I sat down and read this whole story, I sat down and I thought to myself, well, okay, is this really a Wonder Woman story? Like, is this a story where it really has to be Wonder Woman at the center of it? Or is this a story that could be any characters, and that then kind of calling the main character Wonder Woman and Diana just kind of brings a different perspective or a different spin on the story? And I kind of thought about that for a little bit. And where I landed is, this is definitely a Wonder Woman story. In part, there's a couple reasons for that, but in part, I think that one of the reasons that people like Wonder Woman or become attached to her is because she has a very clear and established moral compass. She acts on behalf of doing what is right, doing what is just, acting on behalf of love, for love in general, love for mankind. And in this case, that is still what happens here. That is no different than or I should say, Dead Earth is no different than any other Wonder Woman story from that standpoint. And so because it is Wonder Woman who is in the story, like that is why this really is a Wonder Woman story. It has to be Wonder Woman. The other reason is that there's some interactions or in some flashbacks, some interactions with some other established characters that it has to be Wonder Woman for that to work. It has to be Wonder Woman. So yes, it is a Wonder Woman story, and it does have to be her. And once I kind of realized that, then that's where this story got interesting. It's like, okay, this really is a Wonder Woman story, and it's crazy, but I mean it is. The other thing that I realized is that the structure of this story, I mean, I would call this a Greek tragedy, which is kind of fitting because she's descended from a Greek god. But I mean, this really is I think a Greek tragedy. Crazy enough, I mean, I'm reading through this and for whatever reason, Oedipus popped into my head. Like the structure of that story came to me after I'd read everything and kind of looked at how the story had unfolded. I mean, it to me feels like a Greek tragedy, and that too is really interesting because you're putting Wonder Woman with all of her character traits into this vastly different future. How is that going to work? How is she going to interact with people? And then you put her character into the center of let's call it a Greek tragedy. How does that work? How does her character unfold after that? I mean, that's interesting. This is definitely a story that had to kind of percolate for me. It was something where I finished it late at night, went to bed right after, and I had to just sit there and think for a few days about what I had read and how it had hit me, because it is so different. The artwork is great. I'd say that this definitely falls within the work that Daniel Warren Johnson's done before. I think if you looked at Extremity, Murder Falcon to this, I mean, there's a lot of commonalities. There's some common threads. I think the way that he handles Wonder Woman and the way that he draws her and makes her a true warrior is really interesting. The way that he draws all the characters is really interesting. I mean, there's a grittiness to this that is interesting. I've said interesting a lot, but I'll say it again. It's interesting. There's a lot of intense moments in this story that are handled really well, and the artwork, I think, brings just as much to it as the narrative. There's a lot of intensity, a lot of action sequence, a lot of crowd sequences where the artwork fits. The artwork, the way that he draws everything, I mean, it fits perfectly the story that's being told as well. And again, like, I had to think about it for a little bit, but where I did come out with it is that there really is some interesting choices here that are being made, but I think that there's really a purpose to it. And that's one of the things, that's one of the aspects that draws me to Daniel Warren Johnson's work, is like there's always at least, I think, 2 levels, if not 3, going on in his work. And this is every bit as true for this book as any of the others. And that's really interesting. I got to stop saying that. But the other thing is that I mean, this is a big swing. This is a writer and an artist that is taking a very established character in Wonder Woman and really being willing and wanting, I would say probably, to just go a completely different direction. Almost to stress test the character. Let's really push this character in a different direction and see what comes from that, see what comes out of that. But doing it in such a way that is still true to the character, and that's in part where I come back to this, and this really is a Wonder Woman story, even though it's probably entirely out of canon and it's totally different than anything you'd read. It still is a Wonder Woman story. There's a lot that I've seen talking about book 3, and book 3 does end in an interesting way. And it's, I mean, there's almost every single one of these has got something where you're just going like, wow, I did not expect that, did not see that coming. Book 3 is definitely the same way. Book 4, again, which just came out, this, that's the book where it lands to me as a Wonder Woman story. This is where he brings it back around, and okay, this, Diana with her moral compass being what it is, this is where it comes to fruition, and this is where it lands as a Wonder Woman story. It's hard. Everything is so different about the story in this book that it's hard to talk about it without spoiling any of the aspects of the story, and I don't want to do that because it is so fresh. Like, if you're curious, I think you should definitely check it out. But it is a Wonder Woman story, and I think I've given you enough to say that, if you were curious at the onset, you should definitely check it out. If you were off-put at the onset, or if you read the first one, or if you saw like even just the covers and you liked Wonder Woman and you were kind of put off by this book, I think hopefully I've given you some things to consider to maybe bring you back and say it's still worth checking this book out and giving it a read, giving it a chance. I think if you like Daniel Warren Johnson, you should definitely check this out. If you like his artwork, you should definitely check it out. But if you like Wonder Woman, I think I can say that I think you should check this book out, but maybe just read it. Maybe not seek out all the copies per se, or maybe borrow it from a friend and kind of make your own decisions about it. But I think that there's some valid things here. Again, from the Greek tragedy standpoint, some kind of lessons or I don't know, like moral discussions here. They're kind of interesting. Yeah. So I mean, did I love this book? No. I mean, I'll say that this is probably never going to be on one of my top 10 lists. Did I like it, and am I glad that I read it? Yes, and more so, the more the time has gone on, and the more I've kind of been able to kind of sit and process the story as a whole. Like, the more that I think about this book, the more appreciation I have for it. Again, it's like I don't think this is absolutely stunning and amazing and love it, but I really like it and I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the direction that Daniel Warren Johnson decided to go with this whole narrative. I'm a fan of his work. I was curious to check it out as soon as I saw this. But I'll definitely say, like, I'm even more curious now to see what his next project would be. It's like, at this point, I think it's well established that, like, anything is fair game, and I guess I trust him at this point that whatever character he's going to dive into, he's going to handle it well. It might not be exactly the story you'd want to see just because it's cool, but I mean, I think he's not afraid to kind of push boundaries and push characters, and man, I think there's some interesting work that comes out when you do that. So yeah, that's I guess that's where I'll leave it. Hopefully I've given you enough where if you were on the fence, maybe I've pushed you over to check this book out. Yeah, it's definitely not what I expected, and that's what I've started to come to expect from Daniel Warren Johnson. So, for whatever it's worth. Yeah, so if you can, head down to your local comic book shop, support them if you can. They probably have got book 4 because it just came out. Might be able to help you source all of these. And in the meantime, I'm going to go off and I'm going to read some more comic books, and you should do that too. So, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you liked it, and we'll catch you on the next one.